Before you begin listening to this message, I want you to breathe deeply, because you didn't arrive here by chance. God brought you to this video because He knows your heart, He knows your struggles, and He also knows that which you are waiting for. There is a blessing occupying your thoughts, an answer you long for, something you have asked God for over and over again, even when you no longer had the strength to keep praying. God has seen your silent tears. He has heard those prayers that no one else heard. He has been present in those moments where you felt you were alone, where faith seemed weak, where you doubted even yourself. And yet you kept believing, you kept trusting, you kept walking, even though the path was painful. Today God does not come to reproach you for anything. Today He comes to speak to you with love, with care, with truth. God speaks to you today and says, "Do not forget me when you have your blessing," not as a harsh warning, but as a whisper to the heart. Because many times we seek God intensely when everything is lacking, when everything hurts, when life feels heavy. But when the blessing arrives, when the problem is solved, when the miracle manifests, the human heart tends to get distracted, to trust in its own strength, to forget where the help came from. God was with you in the process. He was there when no one saw you, when you prayed while tired, when you doubted, when you wondered if it was worth it to keep believing. He was your refuge when there were no answers, your peace when everything was uncertainty. That is why today He reminds you that the blessing is not a replacement for the relationship with Him, but a consequence of walking alongside Him. Perhaps you are about to receive that which you waited for so long. Perhaps you are already seeing signs, doors opening, changes beginning to manifest, and God wants you to understand something very important. He does not want to be just the God of your problems. He also wants to be the God of your abundance, of your calm, of your good days. He wants you to seek Him not only when you need help, but also when your heart is at peace. Because there are blessings that, if not lived with God, end up leading away from God. And there are miracles that, if not cared for with humility, can become distractions. God does not want to take anything from you. On the contrary, He wants to give you more, but without losing your faith, without losing your spiritual sensitivity, without losing that humble heart that trusted when everything seemed impossible. Stay and listen to this message. Do not close this video. God wants to speak to you today, to teach you to remain, to remind you that true blessing is not just what you receive, but who you walk with after receiving it. If you open your heart, this message can mark a before and after in your relationship with Him. You did not arrive here by chance. This encounter has a purpose. What will be revealed next could change your perspective on fear and completely transform your waiting. Here is the translation of the final sections, formatted exactly as you requested, with no spaces between lines and a single line break only after each paragraph. I speak to you as someone who knows that season in which pain becomes a routine, that season in which you are no longer fighting, not because you do not care about your life, but because the fight feels more exhausting than the wound itself. It is human, it is understandable. When you have cried so much, there comes a point where the soul says, "I can't do this anymore," and so you adapt, you get used to it, and you learn to live with less hope, less expectation, and less faith. But listen to this carefully. Just because it is understandable does not mean it is acceptable, not for God and not for the plan He wrote with your name. The fact that you have stopped crying does not mean that you have healed. Sometimes it just means that you have resigned. Resignation has the face of peace but the heart of defeat. It looks like calm, but it is not calm, it is surrender. The most dangerous pain is not the one that makes you scream, but the one that makes you go silent. Because when the soul gets used to suffering, it stops asking for help, stops praying with hunger, and stops expecting miracles. It no longer fights for the abundant life, it just tries to pass the day. And that, although it may sound mature, is actually a slow death on the inside. No one gets used to pain all at once. You get used to it in small bits. One day it hurts a lot and you cry. The next day it hurts just as much, but you don't cry as much. Then it hurts and you say, "This is normal." And one day, without realizing it, you no longer ask why, and you no longer dream. You become lukewarm, not cold, which at least recognizes that something is wrong, and not hot, which at least moves with passion. Lukewarm. And lukewarmness is a very dangerous state for the soul. God says in Revelation 3:15-16 that, because you are lukewarm, He will spit you out of His mouth. This is not just about religious faith, it is about life. Lukewarmness is when you are no longer desperate for God, but you aren't really walking with him either. It is the point where you get used to the mediocre, the minimum, the just enough. That is where everything decomposes without a sound, because the lukewarm soul feels no urgency. What adapts too much eventually shrinks. The cry of love in Ephesians 5:14 says, "Wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you." It doesn't say try harder first, it says wake up. Because there are people who are not dead on the outside, but their spirit is in survival mode. Christ did not come to make you efficient at surviving. He came to give you life and wake you up in the middle of your night. Think of the frog in lukewarm water. If you put it in boiling water, it jumps out immediately. But if you raise the temperature slowly, it stays still, accommodates itself, and when it finally wants to jump, it no longer has the strength. That is how normalized suffering works. It didn't destroy you suddenly, it wore you down by degrees. Today, God is shaking you with love. The water is boiling. Get out, not tomorrow but now. Make an honest inventory of what painful things you have normalized. What treatment do you accept? What sadness do you now call my personality? What you name you can confront, and what you confront with God can be broken. Where are you, God? If those words have ever been stuck in your throat while you stared at the ceiling, you are not the first. There are pains that squeeze so hard they seem to push God out of the room. In those moments, the heart starts to draw conclusions. He abandoned me, or if he were with me, this wouldn't be happening. But listen to this with tenderness. Feeling that God is far away is not a sin. It is a human experience when the noise of pain is too loud. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can say is the most honest. Lord, I don't feel you. You look for God in perfect silence, but he looks for you in the noise of your disaster. You think, when I heal and get myself together, then I will draw near to God. But God responds, no, I draw near to you now because your wound is not a barrier for me. It is a door. God is not an elegant visitor who only enters when the house is clean. God is a father, and a father enters even when there are ruins, smoke, and tears. Psalm 3:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." It does not say he is close to the strong or those who have resolved everything. It says, the broken, those who can no longer pretend. That means the place where you feel shame for being broken is exactly where God says, I am closest. Pain attracts his compassion like a magnet. Look at Hagar. She was a discarded woman, alone in the desert without a visible future. She wasn't in a temple. She was fleeing, wounded, and confused. And right there, in the place where no one was looking for her, God found her. Abraham was 75 years old when he received an order that would completely change his life. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. Genesis 12:1. There was no detailed explanation, no map, no visible guarantee. There was only clear direction and a promise, I will make you into a great nation. He was being called to leave stability, roots, and security, and walk toward a future he could not see. This is the stark reality of the biblical text. God requested movement before revealing the destination. Hebrews 11:8 reinforces this. By faith Abraham, when called to obey, went out, even though he did not know where he was going, without knowing. This expression directly confronts our greatest fear, the fear of an uncertain future. Because what paralyzes us most is not the present, but what might happen tomorrow. It is the possibility of losing, of failing, of not being able to sustain ourselves, of not being capable. Abraham could also have thought this way. He could have calculated risks, imagined losses, considered his advanced age, but he decided to trust the promise above logic. Perhaps your fear today is not geographical but emotional. You feel you are being pushed into a new stage, a new job, a new responsibility, an unexpected change, a difficult decision, and what hurts you most is not the change itself, but not knowing the outcome. You want guarantees, you want clear signs, you want control. But God did not give Abraham a detailed report of the future. He gave him a word, and that was enough. There is something important here. God does not reveal the whole path because he wants to generate trust, not dependency on information. When the Lord guides, he is already at the destination, preparing what he promised. The fact that you don't know where you are going doesn't mean you are lost. It means you are being guided. The problem is that we confuse the lack of details with a lack of direction. How many times have you disobeyed out of fear of what might happen? How many decisions have been postponed because the situation didn't seem safe enough? Many say they need to feel absolute peace to act, but the Bible shows that true peace is born in the act of obedience, not before. Abraham didn't leave because he lacked fear, he left despite his fear. Faith doesn't eliminate insecurity, but it prevents it from controlling your decisions. And here is a difficult point. Is what you call prudence actually a fear of trusting fully? Isn't your anxiety disguised as responsibility? Because trusting God means accepting that you won't have all the answers in advance. It means understanding that what is being prepared may be greater than what you can plan. The promise made to Abraham seemed impossible. He had no children. His wife was sterile. Humanly speaking, it made no sense to speak of numerous descendants. Still, God declared something that surpassed visible reality. And that is how the Lord works. He announces the future before circumstances confirm it. He establishes the destination before resources appear. He prepares something greater while we still deal with limitations. Perhaps you are looking at your life and you see scarcity, instability, and fragility. But God may be seeing potential, growth, and fulfillment of promises. The difference lies in perspective. Fear sees what is missing. Faith looks at the one who promised. And when God promises, He fulfills. Pay attention to this. Abraham only saw the fulfillment after walking. If he had remained still waiting for total clarity, he would never have experienced the inheritance. There is something only revealed on the road. There is provision that only appears after the first step. There is direction that only becomes evident when you decide to trust. Have you ever wondered if you are postponing something God has already ordered you to do? Have you considered that the discomfort you feel might be a sign of transition, not danger? The uncertain future can be the space where God is preparing growth, maturity, and something greater than your current expectations. But this requires movement, because what happened to Abraham next goes beyond prosperity and offspring. There was a moment when the promise seemed to die before being fulfilled. And when you understand this specific episode, you will realize that the greatest test is not leaving, but continuing to trust when everything seems to contradict what was said. Joseph was young when he received dreams too big for his age, and perhaps for that reason, too dangerous for the environment in which he lived. He saw sheaves of wheat bowing, stars inclining, a future that seemed impossible to fit into a family marked by jealousy. But the first response he received was not applause, but rejection. The biblical text does not idealize. His brothers conspired, stripped him of his tunic, and threw him into an empty cistern, a dry, cold, and inescapable hole. There begins a pain that many know, even if they haven't experienced it literally, the pain of waiting for a promise while life seems to move backward. Have you ever had the feeling that God showed you something and then everything collapsed? As if heaven said, "It will happen," and the earth replied, "It will not happen." From the cistern to being sold, from being sold to Potiphar's house, from the house to an unjust accusation, from the accusation to prison. The script of Joseph's life seems like a sequence of closed doors, and that is precisely what makes this story so similar to how it feels when waiting is prolonged. Because a long wait doesn't just hurt because of time, it hurts because of what time does to the mind. The mind begins to create versions of the future where everything ends badly. The heart begins to doubt its own faith. The person begins to blame themselves. I made a mistake. I misheard. It wasn't for me. I don't deserve it. And this is one of the cruelest attacks, transforming a period of preparation into an internal courtroom. Prolonged waiting becomes condemnation, and anxiety becomes an incessant judge. Inside the prison, Joseph had no way to speed up the process. He had no influence, no fast track, no control. And here lies a disturbing truth. There are stages where God does not give you shortcuts because He is forming something in you that a shortcut would destroy. Many people interpret silence as neglect, but the Bible shows that at various times silence is a discipline of trust. It is not a lack of love, it is the construction of maturity. It is as if the Lord were saying, "Do not be afraid. I haven't lost control. I am guarding what I promised you while you believe you are standing still." Pay attention to the details. Joseph was imprisoned, but not abandoned. The text says that the Lord was with Joseph and showed him His goodness, even in that place. This challenges a very common belief, the idea that if God is with me, everything has to flow quickly. But what if God is with you precisely where nothing flows? What if God's presence doesn't mean the absence of processes, but the strength to go through them without losing your soul? Because there is a difference between waiting and being destroyed by waiting. Waiting can embitter you, harden you, empty you, or it can purify you, align you, prepare you for something bigger than you imagine. And here is a point that resonates with many. Joseph did not stagnate internally. His external life was stagnant, but his heart kept moving forward. He served, he interpreted dreams, he maintained his integrity, not because it was easy, but because it was the only way to avoid falling into despair. There is a great temptation during long periods, abandoning character in an attempt to gain speed. A person begins to compromise principles, to accept anything, to enter any door, to make any decision because they want to escape pain quickly. But haste without direction leads to loss and might even take you out of the waiting room only to enter a worse one. The Bible is very direct in showing that God was not just guiding Joseph toward a position. God was forming a man capable of holding it. Perhaps you are in that stage where people look at you and think you haven't progressed, but you know how much you have struggled inside not to give up. And this is where many break, when no one sees the invisible battle. Prolonged waiting makes one feel forgotten, compare themselves, think everyone else is moving forward and they've been left behind. Comparison is a slow poison because it transforms the path of others into a test against you. But God's purpose is not a high-speed race, it is a path of formation. There are destinations that require structure, and structure is not formed overnight. Joseph interprets the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker. Good news for one, bad news for the other. And then he asks the cupbearer, "Remember me when you are before Pharaoh." But the cupbearer forgets, and this is brutal because it represents a common human experience. You do the right thing, you help, you sow, and yet they forget you. How many times have you done good, and yet waited for recognition that never came? How many times have you trusted someone and that person disappeared? Prolonged waiting is also this, waiting for a yes that doesn't arrive, a call that doesn't come, an answer that always seems postponed. And in that moment the heart wants to cry out, "God, why do you allow this to happen?" But there is something almost no one considers. If the cupbearer had remembered Joseph too soon, Joseph would have been released from prison too soon, and perhaps wouldn't have found the exact moment God wanted for him. Because God's timing is not just about when, but about with whom and for what. God was not just getting Joseph out of prison, he was connecting him to a place where he could save lives, including the same family that hurt him. The delay you hate might be protecting you from arriving too soon, at a place that isn't ready for you yet. Delay might be preventing you from exposing yourself prematurely. It might be aligning circumstances. It might be preparing the ground, so that when it happens, no one can deny it was God. When Pharaoh finally has dreams no one can interpret, the cupbearer remembers, Joseph's name resurfaces at just the right moment. And it is here where the story takes an emotional turn for those tired of waiting. Joseph didn't come out of prison for a small relief, he came out for a change of season. He went from forgotten to called, from prisoner to counselor, from someone without a voice to someone whose word would sustain a nation in crisis. And this confronts the idea that God only works with small solutions. Sometimes he allows a long wait, because what he's preparing is greater than your immediate request. You ask for a door, and God prepares an entire path. You ask for an answer, and God prepares a repositioning. And when Joseph looks back, he doesn't say, "You destroyed my life." He says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." Genesis 5:20. This phrase doesn't minimize the pain, it relocates it. It doesn't deny what happened, it declares that evil did not have the last word. And here is something that must be said firmly. It is not a lack of faith to feel tired while waiting. The problem is not feeling the weight, the problem is allowing the weight to define your identity and determine your decisions. You can be tired and still be on the right path. You can be crying and still be protected. You can be without answers and still be guided. The Lord didn't call you to understand everything, he called you to trust him while the process unfolds. So without sugarcoating it, let's bring this to your life. What are you waiting for? A cure that seems slow, a job that doesn't materialize, a marriage that has cooled and you pray for its restoration, a child far from God, a lawsuit, a dream you carried with purity and now seems distant? Prolonged waiting creates an inexplicable pain. You haven't hit rock bottom, but you haven't reached fullness either. You are in a middle point, and that middle point is dangerous because it is where hope is tested every day. What if I told you the greatest risk in this phase is not that it doesn't happen, but that you become someone who no longer recognizes their own faith? Because a long period can make you skeptical, hardened, distrustful, and closed. You start saying you no longer have expectations, but deep down it's fear of disappointment. But God didn't call you to live insensitively. He called you to live with trust, even with prudence, even with maturity, even with scars. Trusting is not naivety. Trusting is yielding control and remaining firm in God's character. Here is a practical and direct application for this week. Stop measuring God's actions only by what is visible. Take an honest inventory of what you can still do faithfully while you wait, not what gives you a sense of power, but what keeps you aligned: sincere prayer, reading the Word, integrity in your decisions, service within your reach, mindfulness, discipline in your consumption. Prolonged waiting becomes a mental battlefield, so protect your mind. Not all voices deserve to be heard. Not all messages deserve to stay. Not all conversations deserve space. The enemy doesn't need to destroy your life at a stroke. Sometimes he just needs to keep you tired, confused, and impatient. And impatience, when it grows, makes one trade promises for crumbs. Another practical thing: stop calling delay what might be maturation. Ask yourself, what is God forming in me that I wouldn't learn if everything happened fast? Patience, humility, courage, discernment, self-control, and more. Waiting reveals where your source is. If your source is the result, you collapse when the result is delayed. If your source is God, you suffer, but you don't get lost. You feel, but you don't let yourself be carried away by fear. You cry, but you don't abandon your trust. If you experience this fatigue of waiting and felt God spoke to you through the story of Joseph, write a simple but true phrase in the comments: I will not stop waiting. Then, if you can, add 2 lines describing what you have been waiting for and what has been the hardest part. These are not empty words. It is a step of faith and also a collective embrace, because many people will read it and realize they are not alone. And before you think the weight of waiting is the worst anyone can feel, there is a pain even sharper, because it comes from someone you trusted, someone you loved, someone who should have protected you. Some people are not just tired of waiting, they are hurt because they were betrayed. And that wound has made them distrust everything, even God. And when this next story comes, you will understand why some persecutions and abuses of trust are not the end of your road, but a change of course that can place you exactly where the Lord wants to establish you. David played the harp to soothe Saul. He served with loyalty, faced giants in the name of the Lord, and yet was pursued as an enemy. This is one of the most difficult pains to accept: doing good and receiving attacks in return. After defeating Goliath, the people chanted his name, but Saul's heart was filled with envy. The Bible says that Saul threw a spear at David while he played, trying to pin him to the wall. Imagine the scene: someone you serve, someone who should protect you, becomes the source of the threat. This is not just political persecution, it is emotional betrayal. It is a violation of trust. Perhaps you have never faced a king with a spear in his hand, but you have felt something similar. You have trusted someone who spoke ill of you behind your back. You have been loyal and received ingratitude. You have shared dreams and seen those dreams become grounds for attack. The pain of betrayal carries a different weight because it strikes at the place of surrender. When someone far away hurts you, it hurts, but when someone close hurts you, it destabilizes you. And it is in that moment that fear begins to grow. Fear of trusting again, fear of opening up, fear of serving, fear of loving. David could have allowed the persecution to define his identity. He could have become embittered, vengeful, cold, but even while pursued as a criminal, he declared something that resonates to this day: "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" Psalm 27:1. Observe the power of this declaration. He didn't say there was no danger. He didn't deny the persecution. He recognized the risk, but put his trust above fear. He chose to fear man less and trust God more. Here is a point that confronts us deeply. Betrayal is not a sign that God has abandoned you. Often it is part of the path that positions you. If David had remained comfortable in the palace without persecution, perhaps he never would have developed the total dependence on God that prepared him to rule. The desert molded the character that the throne demanded. Flight forged the faith that the reign would be sustained, and this completely changes the way you perceive the pain you suffered. But let's be honest, when trust is broken, the natural impulse is to close off. The person begins to live in constant alert, creates barriers, decides they will never trust again as before. But this excessive protection also becomes a prison, because you can avoid new wounds, but you also block blessings, and fear begins to silently govern your decisions. Aren't you living like this? Distrusting everyone, believing no one is worthy of your trust, turning a wound into a permanent rule. David had clear opportunities for revenge. He found Saul vulnerable in a cave. His men said it was the perfect moment, the chance to end the persecution once and for all. But David did not touch the Lord's anointed. He only cut off a corner of his robe, and even afterward his heart was struck for having done it. This attitude reveals something profound. He trusted in God's justice. He believed his defense didn't have to come from his own hand. He understood that what was being prepared for his life did not depend on eliminating the enemy, but on faithfulness to the process. Perhaps you try to resolve by force what God wants to resolve with time. Perhaps you try to prove your innocence to everyone when God already knows your truth. There is a difference between taking a stand and seeking revenge, and when you choose to trust, even when it hurts, you declare that you believe the Lord is in control. Even when people fail, betrayal hurts because it shatters expectations. But what if I told you that someone's error doesn't have the power to void the purpose God has prepared? The harm they did to you might have been intentional, but God remains sovereign. It didn't take him by surprise. He didn't lose control. He can even use persecution to pull you out of a place that no longer fits your growth. There is a significant polarization here. Many believe that if God were truly with them, they wouldn't be betrayed. But does faithfulness to God mean the absence of conflict, or does it mean a protective presence even in the midst of it? David was pursued, but he was preserved. He was attacked but not destroyed. He was wronged but not forgotten. This demonstrates that divine protection is not about preventing every attack. It's about ensuring the attack doesn't determine your destiny. Have you noticed that sometimes the greatest victory is not defeating the person who hurt you, but not allowing that pain to transform you into someone you don't recognize? What is being prepared for you requires maturity, and maturity is often born from. It's not about ignoring suffering, but about not allowing it to become your identity. Breathe deeply for a moment. Remember who hurt you. Remember the situation that broke your trust. Now imagine handing that person and that situation over to God, not as an escape, but as a conscious decision to trust that He is a just judge. When you let go, you become free. When you surrender, you are protected. Fear loses its power when trust grows. Perhaps you are thinking, but it's hard to trust again. Yes, it is hard. And no one says you should be naive. Wisdom and discernment are necessary, but closing your heart completely is allowing someone else's error to continue governing your life. And that is not freedom. God doesn't just want to restore your position, He wants to restore your inner being. If this message lit up a dark moment in your life, like this video, as an act of faith and trust, your like helps this message reach those consumed by fear and disappointment. Share this video with someone who has been betrayed and needs to remember that God is still preparing something better, even when people fail. But there is a detail in David's story that few understand. Persecution didn't just lead him to the desert, it also revealed who was truly on his side. Sometimes it's in crises that God separates true alliances from superficial connections. What happened next was not just deliverance, but a repositioning. And when you understand how God transforms incapacity into calling, you will realize there is another silent pain that needs to be confronted, that inner voice insisting that you are not enough for what awaits you. Moses stood before a burning bush that was not consumed when he heard his name called. He wasn't in a palace at that moment. He wasn't surrounded by prestige. He wasn't experiencing something extraordinary in human eyes. He was shepherding sheep in the desert after having fled Egypt for a mistake in his past. And it is in this everyday environment, far from the spotlight, that God calls him to a mission that seemed far too big for him, liberating an entire nation from slavery. Moses' reaction was not one of enthusiasm, it was of insecurity, of fear. It was the question you might have already asked yourself in silence. Who am I to do this? In Exodus 3, when God presents the purpose, Moses responds with resistance. He questions his authority, his capacity, his eloquence. At one point, he practically says he doesn't know how to speak well. He looks at himself and sees limitations. God looks at him and sees a calling. And the divine response is direct, simple, and powerful. I will be with you. Exodus 3:12. God doesn't start by praising Moses' skills. He doesn't give a motivational speech about hidden potential. He points to His own presence. It's as if he were saying, it's not about who you are in isolation, it's about who I am with you. Perhaps your pain isn't persecution, or simply waiting. Perhaps it's that constant feeling of not being. You look at the challenge and you feel unprepared. You look at the responsibility and think you lack the ability. You observe other people and think they are better prepared, have more talent, more confidence, and fear begins to grow. Fear of failure, fear of disappointment, fear of not being able to handle it. This inner voice is cruel because it doesn't just point out your weaknesses, it exaggerates, distorts, and amplifies everything you think you lack. Moses had a complicated past. He killed an Egyptian and fled. He spent years hidden in the desert. Humanly speaking, he was not the ideal candidate to face Pharaoh. And it is precisely here where the story challenges a very common belief, the idea that God only chooses the best prepared. The Bible shows the opposite. God calls people conscious of their limitations so that his strength can be manifested. If Moses had felt self-sufficient, perhaps he would have attributed his success to his own. But when someone weak is used, the glory doesn't lie in the creature, but in the Creator. And here is a question that disturbs many people. Is that feeling of incompetence you carry truly humility? Or is it fear in disguise? Because there is a difference between recognizing limitations and using them as an excuse not to obey. Moses tried to argue, tried to evade the task, tried to transfer the mission to someone else. And God patiently reaffirmed his presence. He didn't deny it would be a challenge. He didn't say Pharaoh would be easy. He guaranteed company, he guaranteed direction, he guaranteed that what was being prepared was greater than the insecurity Moses felt in that moment. Have you ever noticed how the mind creates catastrophic scenarios even before the first step? Moses could have imagined failure, rejection, and humiliation before the most powerful king of the era, but the story demonstrates that the power that freed the people didn't come from Moses' eloquence, but from God. The plagues, the parting of the sea, the distress in the wilderness, none of this depended on his human capacity, it depended on divine faithfulness. When God tells us not to fear, he doesn't deny the magnitude of the task, he affirms the magnitude of his presence. Perhaps you face something that seems too big, a family responsibility, a ministerial calling, a professional decision, a change that requires courage. And the first reaction is to compare yourself, belittle yourself, think someone else would do it better. But what if God weren't looking for the most eloquent, but the most available? What if your awareness of your weakness were precisely the space where his strength would be manifested? There is a crucial point in this story. Moses only discovered his capacity after deciding to obey. This ability developed over time. Confidence grew in the process. Fear didn't disappear by magic, it was replaced by concrete experiences with God. Each step, each plague announced, each deliverance seen with his own eyes strengthened his faith. The promised presence became a perceived presence. Many people wait until they feel completely prepared to start something. They wait to have full confidence to act, but the Bible shows that confidence often comes after obedience, not before. What is being prepared for you might require a level of faith you haven't yet experienced, and perhaps God is allowing this feeling of incompetence so that you don't depend only on yourself. Breathe deeply and think, in what area of your life have you been repeating to yourself, I can't? Where have you been making yourself small even before trying? It could be in your faith, at work, in your role as a father, mother, leader, or child. The voice of fear tells you that you are not capable. The voice of God says he will be with you. And when divine presence is, the landscape changes completely. There is also an important detail. God didn't eliminate all the difficulties from Moses' path. There was resistance from the people, murmuring, fatigue, but in each stage, there was direction. This demonstrates that not being self-sufficient is not an impediment when one is aligned with purpose. The greatest error would be allowing insecurity to stop you while something greater is being prepared beyond your current understanding. You can keep focusing on your limitations, or start focusing on God's faithfulness. You can repeat over and over that you lack capacity, or you can declare that he is enough. Transformation begins in how you see your own story. Moses' past did not cancel his future. His insecurity did not void his calling. His weakness did not prevent God from acting. If this message questioned your perception of yourself, write a phrase in the comments representing your decision to trust more in God's presence than in your limitations. Genesis 16:13 says that she called on Jehovah, "You are the God who sees." That is powerful. She did not call him a God who demands, a God who punishes, a God who distances himself. She called him the God who sees, because in the moment where she felt invisible to the world, she discovered she was not invisible to heaven. and today God repeats it to you with the same authority. I see you now in this disaster, in this night, in this disorder, in this room where you feel like life has fallen in on you. Let me paint it for you with an image your soul can touch. After an earthquake, paramedics do not wait for the injured to come walking out. They enter the dust, they get into the twisted iron, they remove stones with their hands. They don't ask first if the injured person brought it on themselves. They don't demand that the injured person clean themselves up before helping them. They simply enter, and if they hear a sigh, if they hear a groan, if they hear a soft thud, they get excited because it means life. God is like that. He does not wait for you to get out of the rubble. He enters your rubble. And if today you can hear these words, if something inside you still responds, even if it is with a sigh, it is because God is already there searching through the dust for what pain tried to bury. Maybe you say, but I don't hear anything. And I understand you. There are days where the voice of God does not sound like thunder, it sounds like a thread. It doesn't arrive as a shout, it arrives as a gentle persistence that won't let you give up. Sometimes his voice is a phrase that sustains you without explanation. Sometimes his voice is a door that opens at just the right moment. Sometimes his voice is this message falling into your life like water on dry land. Because God speaks in the midst of the disaster, not after. He speaks when you are trembling, not when you are already steady. He speaks when you are confused, not when you have already understood everything. That is why today do not wait for perfect conditions to talk to him. Speak to him now, dirty, broken, tired, angry, confused. Tell him, Lord, here I am. I don't feel you, but I need you. And stay a moment in silence, not to produce an emotion, but to give space to his presence. The presence of God does not depend on your emotional cleanliness. It depends on his eternal faithfulness. He is close to the brokenhearted, not because you deserve it, but because that is how his heart is. Today God tells you, I didn't leave. I never left. When you felt like heaven was closed, I was closer to you than your own breath. I am the God who sees in the darkness, and what you are hearing right now is no coincidence. It is my voice entering your rubble to tell you, here I am, I always. And if God is here with you in this disaster, then you need to know something about what comes next, because your story has pages you can't even imagine, and the next thing he is going to do with you won't be small. Number 10. The chapters God already wrote and you have not yet read. Let me ask you something calmly. What is in the pages you haven't read yet? Because you are looking at your life from the hardest chapter, from the darkest scene, from the point where the story feels unfair and your tired mind concludes everything ends here. But God does not write endings in the chapter of pain. God writes redemption. God writes a turning point. God writes light. And even if you don't see it now, there are chapters already written with your name and you still haven't read them. 1 Corinthians 2:9 says something that is a solid promise. Things that eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor have entered into the heart of man, are those which God has prepared for those who love him. Listen to what that means. What is coming is not just a little bit better than what you are living through. It is so different, so unexpected, so far beyond your calculation that your mind cannot even imagine it. The limitation is not in God. The limitation is in your wounded imagination. Your pain trained you to expect the worst. Your trauma taught you to think small so as not to be disappointed. But God does not work within the limits of your fear. God does not need your ability to dream to fulfill what he has already prepared. You just need to keep walking to reach that page. And I know this is where your heart responds, but I can't believe it. I understand. I know it's hard to believe in a good future when the present is so heavy, when you wake up and the soul feels like lead, when you look ahead and only see more of the same, when the word hope feels like a concept others use but that doesn't work for you. But listen to this, with compassion. Your inability to see the good doesn't mean it doesn't exist, it means you haven't reached that page. Standing in a dark hallway, and because you don't see the exit, you assume there is no exit. But there are doors that cannot be seen from where you are. There are turns that are not understood from the center of the chaos. That is why there is a paradox that is stealing your life. You are declaring that your story is bad without having read the end. You are judging the whole book by the worst chapter, and no good author ends their story at the saddest point. Pain is usually the climax, not the outcome. The chapter where you lose strength is not the chapter where you lose your destiny. It is the chapter where God begins to show what his faithfulness is made of. Think of it like this. Imagine someone reading a novel. They reach the chapter where the protagonist loses everything, where it seems the story broke, where injustice wins. that person closes the book in anger and says, "What a horrible story." But if they had read 2 more chapters, they would have discovered the redemption, the reunion, the unexpected victory, the door that opened when everything seemed closed. You are trying to close the book of your life, right in the sad chapter. And God tells you, keep reading, keep walking, don't close the book in the night, because the author hasn't finished yet. And Psalm 126:5-6 is the way God teaches you his method. Those who sowed with tears shall reap with joy. He who goes forth weeping, bearing precious seed, shall doubtless come again with rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him. Look at the detail. It doesn't say, he who sowed and was already happy. It says he sowed with tears. He doesn't ask you not to cry. He asks you not to stop. Some people believe tears are a sign of defeat, but in the kingdom, tears can be sowing water. You are sowing even when it hurts. You are walking even when you don't understand. You are surviving even when you feel. And God says, there will be a harvest, there will be a return with rejoicing, not because you are strong, but because he is faithful. So today, make a small but powerful commitment. Write on a sheet of paper in your own handwriting, as if you were signing a pact with the truth. My story is not over. The best pages I haven't read yet. Put it by your bed. Let it be the first thing your eyes see when you wake up, and the last when you go to sleep, because your mind is going to try to return to the dark chapter again and again. And you need to remind it who writes this book. Today God tells you, I am the author of your story, and I tell you with all the authority of my word, the chapter that made you cry is not the last one. There are pages written with your name that contain surprises your mind has not been able to imagine. Restoration you didn't seek, joy you didn't expect, doors I already opened while you slept. Don't close the book, turn the page, walk, even if it's slow, even if it's with tears, because the author isn't finished yet. And there is something else you need to understand. Your rising is not just for you. There are eyes watching you, hearts that depend on your example. Your paralysis affects more lives than you imagine, and that is what we are going to see now. Number 11. Your children, your family, your environment need you to get up there. Are nights where you look in the mirror and don't recognize the person in front of you. Not because you've become bad, but because you've become tired. Because pain has been turning you off in layers, as if every blow took away a bit of color. And what weighs the most is not just what you feel inside, but what you imagine those who love you are seeing on the outside. Your children, your partner, your family. They don't understand your internal battles, but they perceive your emotional absence. They feel when you are there physically but far away inside, and that awareness breaks you because you would like to give them the best, but you feel stuck in the most wounded version of yourself. Many of us say to ourselves, when I'm okay, I'll be an example. As if an example only exists when everything looks perfect. But the most powerful example is not that of the flawless parent who never breaks. The most powerful example is that of the parent who fell and got up. Your children don't need a hero without flaws. They need to see someone real, someone who cries, someone who struggles, someone who makes mistakes and still decides to stand up with God's help. Because the message that will mark them won't be my dad never suffered, but my dad suffered and didn't give up. Grace becomes an inheritance when it is seen in motion. Think of this like a lighthouse. A lighthouse does not exist to admire itself. It doesn't shine for its own satisfaction. It shines to guide the ships navigating in the darkness. When a lighthouse goes out, the ships aren't at fault, but they lose direction, and sometimes your house feels like people navigating with questions, with fears, with silent struggles, and you turned off inside as if you no longer had light to offer. But God doesn't ask you to be a perfect son. He asks you to light even a small flame again, because even a small flame in the night saves entire routes. Deuteronomy 6:6-7 says it. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart, and you shall repeat them to your children and talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. There is a phrase there that seems minimal, but it is prophetic. When you rise up, God assumes there will be days where you fall. God does not ignore your humanity, but God gives you an instruction for the moment of rising, for the moment of returning, for the moment of resuming. Faith is transmitted by living, not just by talking. And to live, you need to be on your feet. Not with arrogance, but with obedience, not with perfection, but with And Psalm 78, or adds another layer, we will not hide them from their children, telling to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and his strength, and the wonderful works he has done. Do you know what that means in your situation? That your story is not just yours. Your story can become a narrative that rescues. Your process can become a testimony that protects. Your rising can be the language your child will use when it is their turn for their own storm. Because one day they will also face a blow. One day she will also feel fear. And on that day they won't remember only what you told them. They will remember what they saw. They will remember that there was darkness, and yet you sought God. They will remember that you were tired, and yet you walked. They will remember that it hurt you, and yet you didn't give yourself over to the ground. That is why today the application is not a long speech. Today it is a decision with a voice. Look someone who loves you in the eyes and say, even with a thread of strength, I am going to get up. I don't know how, but with God I will. That phrase seems small, but it is a door, it is a pact, it is breaking the spell of silence. Because when pain isolates you, the family begins to live with assumptions, and God wants to break the signal. The lighthouse is turning back on. Listen, when you get up, those who watch you get up. Your rising is a living inheritance. It is emotional coverage. It is spiritual direction. It is permission for others to also heal without guilt. Your children don't need a perfect father. They need a father who gets up. Your family doesn't need you to have all the answers. They need to see you seek God. Your recovery is not just yours. It is a legacy for those around you. Today God tells you in a whisper that weighs like eternity, don't do it just for yourself. Do it for the eyes that look at you with hope, even when you don't see it. Your rising will be the most powerful sermon you will ever preach. And now perhaps you think, okay, but where do I start? There is so much that needs to change that I don't even know what step to take first. Quiet. What you need is much smaller than you imagine. Number 12. The first step doesn't have to be big, it just has to be. There is a silent pressure that crushes you when you decide to get up. The pressure to do it all at once, as if to prove you are better you had to change your entire life today. And that expectation that seems like motivation is actually a trap, because when you feel that what you must rebuild is enormous, your soul becomes even more paralyzed. You tell yourself, if I can't do it perfectly, better not to start. And so fear disguises itself as prudence, doubt disguises itself as realism, and stagnation disguises itself as patience. But God today cuts that cycle with a simple truth. The first step doesn't have to be big, it just has to be. The world celebrates explosive transformations, the dramatic before and afters, the stories that sound like fireworks. But God works with seeds. God works with small beginnings. God works with the microscopic that no one applauds, but that heaven records. Small is not insignificant. Small is the genetic code of greatness. If God makes a tree grow from a seed, why do you demand of yourself to be born as a forest from one day to the next? That is why Zechariah 4:10 gives you a phrase that heals the mind. For who has despised the day of small things? For they shall rejoice. There are days that seem like little, but they are sacred. There are steps that seem like nothing, but they are obedience. Matthew 14:29 says, and he said, come. And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. Peter didn't jump like a superhero. Peter didn't run on the water as if it were easy. Peter put down one foot, then the other, one step. And that step, so small and so trembling, separated the natural from the supernatural. Jesus didn't tell him, run. He didn't ask for a spectacular performance. He said, come. One step of obedience is more powerful than 1,000 perfect plans that are never executed. God doesn't ask you to run a marathon tomorrow. God asks you to move a foot today. Don't feel bad if your first step is so small that no one notices. God notices. If your first step is opening your eyes tomorrow and saying, God, today I choose to try, that is already more than you did yesterday. If your first step is sitting a moment without fleeing your thoughts and saying, Lord, here I am, even if I'm broken, that is already life returning. There are victories that make no noise but break chains. There are advances that aren't seen in photos but are felt in the spirit. Imagine an enormous dam holding back water for years. That dam doesn't always break with an explosion. Many times it breaks with a tiny crack, first a drop, then a thread, then a stream, until one day the structure gives way, and everything that was contained is released with unstoppable force. Your first small step is that. It seems like nothing, but it is the start of an avalanche of restoration. What you do today in secret will what sustains your life in public. What you today begin with fear will tomorrow be your testimony of freedom. So today, I am not going to ask you for an endless list of things. Today, I am going to ask you for a single micro-obedience, a single action so small that your mind cannot argue with it. Maybe it's praying upon waking for 60 seconds and saying, God, today I choose to live. Maybe it's writing on paper in your handwriting, my story is not over, and putting it where your eyes will see it when sadness wants to convince you otherwise. Maybe it's walking for 5 minutes outside your house just to remind your body that there is still sky and air and path. Maybe it's calling someone you lost track of and saying, I'm not at my best, but I want to start again. It doesn't matter which one you choose. What matters is that it is today, because the smallest step is the one that breaks the inertia of years. Don't wait for a big moment to obey. Direction weighs more than speed. Size weighs less than the decision. Today God tells you in a whisper of grace, I don't care about the size of your step. I care about the direction. One step toward me, however small, activates all my heaven in your favor. Do not despise the small. Small in my hands becomes a miracle. You just take the step. God handles the water. God handles sustaining you. God handles what you cannot control. And while you take that first step, I want you to know something beautiful. Life did not stop being good while you suffered. The mercies of God kept arriving every morning, even if you didn't have the strength to notice them. Lamentations 3:22-23 says it this way, His mercies are new every morning. What happened is that pain closed your eyes. But if today you dare to open them, even a little, you are going to start seeing small signs, and those small signs will be the beginning of your return. Number 13, life does not wait for you to be ready to keep being good. There is a very subtle lie that pain teaches you when it becomes routine. It tells you, life stopped, and because you feel stopped inside, you start to believe that everything outside also froze. But no, life kept moving, the days kept arriving, the mornings kept being born. And the most powerful thing of all is this, life kept being good. Even when you didn't feel ready to see it, not because your pain is small, not because your wound is imaginary, but because the goodness of God does not depend on your emotional state. The goodness of God is a river that doesn't stop flowing because you sat on the bank to cry. Lamentations 3:22-23 says, Through the Lord's mercies we are not consumed, because His compassions fail not. They are new every morning, great is your faithfulness, they are new every morning. Not when your sadness passes, not when you have strength, not when you smile again, every. That includes the morning after your worst night. That includes the morning of the day you thought, I can't take anymore. That includes the dawn of your confusion, the dawn of your emptiness, the dawn where you only just survived. God did not pause His mercies while you suffered. They arrived on time, as always. The problem was not the absence of God, it was that you had your eyes closed and your hands busy holding the weight of pain. And I don't blame you for that. There are pains that don't just take away joy, they take away the capacity to perceive. You become functional on the outside, but inside you are as if numbed. A child's laughter passes by you and doesn't enter. A beautiful message doesn't touch you. A hug feels far away. Coffee no longer has flavor. The sky can be beautiful and yet you don't see it. But listen to this calmly. Just because you didn't feel it doesn't mean it wasn't there. The goodness of God did nothing because you could not perceive it. It only became invisible to a tired mind, to an exhausted heart, to a spirit that has been resisting for a long time. Psalm 118:24 declares, This is the day the Lord has made, we will rejoice and be glad in it. Sometimes we read that and think it's an impossible command, as if God were telling you, smile when you are broken. But it's not a cold demand, it's a door. It's God telling you, today I also made a day for you. Today there is also something that belongs to you. Today there is also a spark of life I can light, because the enemy doesn't need to destroy your life all at once. It is enough for him to convince you that there is nothing good waiting for you anymore. It is enough for him to make you believe that living is just enduring. And that is precisely what God wants to break, that learned hopelessness that steals the details, that steals the simple, that steals gratitude. Life keeps offering you gifts while you keep reviewing the bills of what you lost. You are trapped counting what went away, and heaven keeps sending fresh mercies. You look at the wound, and God keeps giving you breath. shelter, food, a call, an opportunity, a ray of sun, a song that touches you for seconds, a moment of calm that appears without warning. And no, that doesn't erase what you lost, but it does remind you that your story didn't end. Because if God gives you bread today, it is because there is still a path. If God gives you a sunrise, it is because there are still pages. Imagine this like a scene. God has served a table in your honor, a table with your name. Your chair is waiting. The plates are hot. The aroma of food fills the hall. There is bread, there is water, there is wine, there is a hug, there is a future. But you are in the room next door with the door closed, crying on the floor. And the sad thing is not that the table doesn't exist. The table is. The sad thing is that the pain convinced you that you no longer deserve to sit, that it's no longer for you, that you arrived late. But the banquet did not disappear. The chair was not taken by another. What God prepared for you is still there. You just need to get up, open the door, and sit down. Your response today doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be honest. Go out, even for a moment. Look at the sky, breathe deep. Find one small thing that is beautiful and that you hadn't noticed. It could be a cloud, a leaf moving with the wind, the sound of a motorcycle in the distance, a smile on the street, the light entering through the window. And when you find it, give thanks for it out loud. Not because your pain is a small thing, but because you are training your eyes to recognize that God is still active. You are recovering the habit of receiving. Today God tells you that every morning He sent you fresh mercies. Every sunset He painted new colors for you. Every breeze you felt on your face was a silent caress. God did not stop being good while you stopped looking, but today He asks you to open. There is a table served waiting for you. He is the host, and you, even with your wounds, remain the guest of honor. God did not stop being good. You were surviving with your eyes closed, and that is understood. But now comes the turn. If you look again, if you receive again, if you open the door again, you are going to discover that life still had beauty saved for you, even in the midst of the most painful chapter. And that leads us to something deeply human that we have to talk about with honesty: your tears and what God does with them. Number 14. Allow yourself to cry, but do not allow the crying to define you. Your tears are not weakness, they are evidence. They are the proof that your heart did not turn to stone, that what you lived mattered, that what you lost had real weight. There are people who harden themselves so as not to feel, but you felt, and that hurts. Yes, but it also speaks of life. God created tears as a language of the soul. Sometimes they are cleansing. Sometimes they are an outlet. Sometimes they are prayer when words no longer come. Crying heals. Crying releases internal pressure. Crying arranges what was broken. But listen to me with affection and with firmness. Living in tears makes you sick. There is a point where crying stops being medicine and becomes a room, and God does not want you to live locked in there. Psalm 35 says it like a hug. For His anger is but for a moment, His favor is for life. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Weeping may endure for a night. That means yes, there are nights, there are dark seasons, there are stages where all you can do is resist and cry. God is not scandalized by that, but He also says, joy comes in the morning. And He doesn't say it as a pretty phrase to decorate your pain. He says it as a threshold, as a sacred limit, as a line that reminds you that the night is not your identity. The night is a season, and seasons change, even if you feel that time stops. Look at the example of Jesus, because here is the key. Jesus was not a man of dampened emotions. He was the fullest man who walked the earth. And in John 11, when He arrives at Lazarus' tomb, He doesn't pose as strong. He doesn't act indifferent. He doesn't say, I don't cry because I have faith. No, Jesus wept. John 11:35 says it, with a simplicity that strikes the heart. Jesus wept. His tears were holy, they were human, they were real. But observe what comes after, because there is the secret of your healing. His tears did not stop Him. His tears did not define Him. His tears did not cancel His authority. Jesus wept, and then He acted. John 11:43 says that He cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. Do you realize? He wept. He wept and He walked. He wept, and He released life. That teaches you something you need today. Crying and acting are not enemies. You can have tears in your eyes and strength in your hands at the same time. You needed to cry to heal, but you need to stop crying to finish healing. Because weeping has a purpose. And when you fulfill its purpose, God begins to call you to something else. Healthy mourning cleanses you. allows you to recognize the loss, allows you to name the pain. Destructive mourning binds you, makes you repeat the same chapter as if it were the only chapter. It steals your vision, it steals your desire, it steals your identity, and without realizing it, you no longer say I am hurt, but I am my wound. And there is where God tells you, no, son, daughter, your story did not end in that collapse. Imagine your soul like a sky. Rain is necessary. Rain cleanses the air, moistens the earth, feeds seeds that were dry. Feel that rain, the drops on your face, the sound on the roof, the smell of wet earth. That crying was good. It was the rain your interior needed so as not to become a desert. But eternal rain destroys, floods, levels, turns what should nourish into something that drowns. Your crying was the necessary rain, but God did not design you to live in a flood. He wants the sky to open, He wants the sun to return, He wants the rainbow to appear, which is only seen when the storm begins to subside. Perhaps today you are at that threshold, that point where you have already cried much, where your body is tired, where your soul is saturated, and yet you are afraid to let go of the crying because you think, if I stop crying, it's as if I don't care. But no. Stopping crying is not forgetting. To stop crying is to honor in another way. It is to say, this hurt, yes, this marked me, yes, but it is not going to rule me. And that is not betrayal, that is healing. That is obedience. That is life. Ask yourself a question with honesty, without condemning yourself. Am I in the necessary rain or in the destructive flood? If you are in a flood, tell God something simple. Without speeches, Lord, give me the grace to dry my eyes and move my feet. Because sometimes what you need most is not an explanation. It is strength to walk. And walking doesn't mean you are already perfect. Walking means you no longer gave up. Walking means pain doesn't have you as a hostage. Today God tells you that He saw every tear you shed. He gathered them all. None was lost. None was useless. But today, with the love of a father who won't let you sleep on the ground forever, He tells you, it is already morning. The weeping has accomplished its work. Now comes joy. Not joy without memory, not false joy, not joy that denies what was lived, but the joy of one who cried all they had to cry and now can look forward with clean eyes. Your tears cleared the way, now walk through it. And with those clearer eyes, with an honest heart, and with feet ready to take the next step, you need to hear the truth that seals all this. Life goes on and God is still writing. Your story still hasn't ended. Number 15. Your story does not end here. The best pages are. Thus says the Lord in Jeremiah 31:16-17. Refrain your weeping, and your eyes from tears, for your work shall be rewarded, says the Lord, and they shall come back from the land of the enemy. There is hope in your future, says the Lord. Hear it as if God were pronouncing it over your life here and now, right in this chapter where you thought everything was over. Refrain your voice from weeping, not because your tears are wrong, not because God is scolding you for feeling, it is because the weeping already did its part, and now God is marking a threshold for you. Like when a father stoops down, takes your face in both hands, and tells you, enough, son, enough, daughter, look at me. There are moments where crying cleanses, but the moment arrives where God asks you to lift your gaze, not to deny what happened, but so you don't stay living under it, because your work shall be rewarded. And here God is not talking about a job, He is talking about your resistance. About those nights where no one saw you but you kept breathing. Mornings where it was hard to get up but you opened your eyes anyway. About those days where you walked inside with a broken heart and yet you didn't let the world destroy you completely. That is work, that is battle, that is effort. And God says there is a wage, there is a reward, there is a response prepared for your perseverance, and then comes what your soul needs like water. There is hope also for your future. He doesn't say maybe. He doesn't say we'll see. He doesn't say if you behave well, He says there is. And that word is a rock under your feet when everything else feels like sand. Because if the God who does not lie said it, then your future is not canceled, it is in process. Your story didn't end. It was being written in silence while you thought it had run out of ink. Now breathe and let another promise embrace you with authority. Revelation 21:4-5 says that God will wipe away every tear, that there shall be no more death, nor crying, nor clamor, nor pain, for the former things have passed away. And then the voice from the throne declares, Behold, I make all things new. That is not poetry, it is the language of the author. When God says, I make things new, He is not applying makeup to ruins, He is creating a future. He is not gluing pieces on the outside, He is renewing from the inside. That is the kind of God who speaks to you today. The one who not only consoles, but the one who rebuilds. And if something inside you broke upon hearing this, do not resist. If the tears return, let them come. But understand the turn. Let those tears not be the last of defeat, but the first of hope. Because what you are receiving is not human motivation. It is not someone trying to cheer you up with pretty phrases. It is the Word of God entering your night to tell you that there is a tomorrow, that there is more to come, that there are new pages, that there is life even after the disaster. And feel this image. You are standing in an open field in the coldest pre-dawn. Everything seems stopped. You hear nothing but the wind. The darkness is so dense that it makes you think the sun forgot you. But there on the horizon, a thin line of light appears, barely a golden thread, and without making a sound, that thread begins to grow. The cold begins to give way, colors return bit by bit, and the sun, which seemed lost, rises with a quiet, firm, inevitable strength. That line of light is God speaking to you. That line of light is your story saying, I'm still going. That dawn is not a wish, it is a promise in motion. Now listen to this as an instruction of love. Stand up. Yes, literally if you can. Not as a show, not as an act, but as a prophetic act. Because sometimes the body needs to obey first so that the soul can catch up later. Put your hand over your heart and speak, even if your voice comes out trembling. Say, my story has not ended. Today I get up. The best pages of my life have not yet been written, and God holds the pen. And if you feel weird saying that, remember that faith doesn't always feel strong. Sometimes faith feels like a whisper, but a whisper in the right direction changes everything. God is sealing you with an irrevocable truth. I didn't close the book. The chapter of pain was real, yes. It was necessary, yes. It taught you, it broke you, it refined you, it revealed things to you that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. But it is not the end. The pages that are coming contain restoration you didn't ask for, doors you didn't know existed, strengths you didn't imagine, purpose that was asleep. And not because you are perfect, but because He is faithful. He is the one who makes all things new. He is the one who declares hope for your future. So today, do not leave here with the same sentence over your life. Do not leave repeating it's over. Do not leave saying it's not worth it. The author of your story is looking at you and telling you, turn the page. The best is yet to come. Your dawn has already begun. Get up, shake off the dust, dry those tears, and walk with me toward what I prepared for you since before you were born. We have traveled a long road together. And if you reached this point, it is no coincidence. It is because your soul was hungry to hear exactly this. I want you to keep 3 things. First, your pain froze your clock, but God's clock never stopped. He kept working in silence while you struggled to survive. Second, your identity is not what broke you. It is what God said of you before any wound existed. You are His. You are loved. Third, your story did not end. The best pages are ahead, written by an author who never abandons a work halfway. Today, before sleeping, do something simple and powerful. Put your hand over your heart and say out loud, God, thank you for not closing my book. Today I choose to get up. Do it even if you don't feel it. Do it even if your voice trembles. God honors trembling obedience. At the beginning of this message, you heard Jesus say, rise up. Now, after all you received, that word weighs differently. It is no longer just an order, it is an invitation from a Father who took you by the hand and refuses to leave you on the ground. If this message touched your heart, share it with someone who today needs to hear that their story has not ended. It could be the word that changes their day. And if this channel has been a blessing to your life, subscribe so that God continues speaking to you here. Life goes on and God needs you on your feet. May the God who sustained you in the darkest night give you now the strength to walk toward the dawn He has already prepared for you. May your feet find steadiness, may your heart find peace, and may every step you take be accompanied by His presence. In the name of Jesus, rise up. Your story continues. See you soon.